Iceland, it's basically just one big volcano. So now we're getting these incredible landscapes. It's just, there's nothing more magical than that in my opinion. Living on an island for 1,000 years in isolation, it creates some very superstitious people. I am gonna dip into some storytelling now, guys. The really juicy stuff, the Icelandic folklore. My name is Magnus Viking, and you might already be wondering, is that like a fake tourist nickname or something? It just happens to be my actual name. It's just really good for tourism. I do have a last name. It's Magnus' son. But this is a tradition in my family. It's like a family name, but it's not a last name. We're all the males. We carry the name Viking. So my father's also Magnus Viking. But I do actually have a little tourist nickname, the handstanding Viking, because I tend to do handstands almost on every single trip that I do on some very sketchy rocks. I am always joined by my dog, Fenris, the white wolf. He's actually a Siberian Husky. He's not a wolf. He's just kind of a brat, but he's absolutely awesome to have on the trips. But without further ado, we're going to go over what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share with you some photos of some epic landscapes. We're going to talk about like what you can do in Iceland and the different types of landscapes. And then we're going to go into a little bit of storytelling, where I'm going to talk about the Viking history, about the religion, the Norse mythology that the Vikings used to believe in about 1,000 years ago. And then we're going to go into the Icelandic folklore. I know a lot of people are waiting for that. The trolls and the elves. And then we're going to combine all of this into this hiking trick I'm going to introduce to you guys called the Ancient Trails. And this is what I specialize in here in Iceland. This is the trip I run the most. Let's start. Iceland is just an island in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean between Greenland and Europe or Norway. It's basically just one big volcano that popped out of the ocean about 20 million years ago and is constantly being formed by glaciers and erosion, that is like rivers and weather and water. So now we're getting these incredible landscapes from this volcanic island. These are mountains in the Fjallabak region, close to Landmannalaugar. We have just some crazy contrasts around here. These black deserts that we have in the highlands, they've got these green mountains covered by moss. We have like beautiful vegetation here. This is from the summer. This red plant is called the red sorrel or sheep's sorrel. They just make these incredible landscapes. We have sea cliffs. We are an island. This is from the West Fjords. This is me also doing a handstand. I tend to do handstands almost everywhere. We have beautiful waterfalls. I'm talking some really beautiful waterfalls. And now you might be wondering, this is like a Photoshop picture. The water in this particular waterfall, it's the bluest waterfall in Iceland. This is a little bit enhanced, but the water actually looks this blue. We have a lot of glaciers here. We are about 11% of Iceland is covered by glaciers. One of the most popular activity to do here in Iceland is to go hiking on the glaciers. This is so easy to do it, but you do have to do it with a guide. I do not recommend going hiking on a glacier without a guide because there are so many dangers that you just don't know about. So the guide will keep you safe. Not only can you go hike on a glacier, you can actually go into the glaciers, into these so-called ice caves. They are seasonal and they change every single year. So if you go to an ice cave this year, next year they're going to be completely different because the caves are constantly melting and new caves are being created. If you come here in the winter, this is how it kind of looks like now in the countryside. Everything looks like from a fantasy movie. It's like a winter wonderland here. This is from a mountain hut in Thorsmur, and the sky very often turns into very strange colors in the middle of winter because the sun is always low. The sun never truly rises that far up on the horizon. So in December and January, the colors of the sky often look like this. It's just an old photo. I really love this photo, and it makes you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. Of course, we have the Northern Lights. A lot of people, they come to Iceland in the winter, mainly for the Northern Lights. They are very frequently seen, but it has to be on a dark night and with clear skies. And you do have to be a little bit lucky because it depends on solar activity, which can be forecasted. But my top tip is just if there's a clear sky, you just go out and you hope to see them. You drive finding gaps in the clouds. And if you're lucky, you're going to have a great time. They can look like on the pictures, but sometimes they're harder to see. It depends a little bit from time to time how they look like. The most spectacular location in Iceland, in my opinion, and I'm a little bit biased because the Ancient Trails takes you there, is the Kerlingarfjöll Mountains. I call them the Troll Mountains because there used to be a troll that lived there called Kerling. And this word, Kerling, literally means troll or a troll woman in Icelandic. And it's just this valley with hot springs, a lot of colorful hillsides. It just looks like from a movie. I do, however, have a favorite place, which is called Þjóðadalir. I'm kind of a dork because this is just a little valley in the middle of nowhere with this tiny little hut. The valley itself is very green and friendly. But the thing is, if you hike up to the top of that mountain, which you can see here in the background, this is how it looks like. This is an overview of the glacier, Langjökull, beautiful mountains, just rivers snaking their way through the highlands. And you feel like a king because you just hiked up that mountain, which is quite a hike. Anyway, we're going to talk about volcanoes now because it's the land of fire and ice. This photo is of the 2022 eruption, which happened just a few years ago. This particular eruption, I'm not recommending that people do this unless the Icelandic government has sent out the official statements that it is safe to do so. Because this one in particular, it was possible to walk all the way up to the lava in a very safe way. They actually made a trail up to the lava field. And I got a little video just to show you that it's not fake. The people over there, they're just standing on a hill overlooking the lava just flowing through the land, just next to the crater. And that was also a special type of eruption because this was such a small scale eruption. We had no ash clouds, not a lot of toxic gases. So it was possible to go very, very close. The thing is, Icelandic people were actually a little bit extreme. The most famous guy in Iceland actually made a music video there. And this is a video from one local Icelander that went there and he actually just cooked some marshmallows on the lava. This actually explains a lot. A lot of people think that it's very dangerous to come to Iceland when there is an eruption happening, but this is what the Icelanders are doing. We're just having a little bit of fun, as long as it's safe, of course. I am going to dip into some storytelling now. We're going to talk about the Vikings. This is just an AI photo. This is not the real photo, as you might have guessed. The Vikings, in very simply terms, they were the pirates of the north. They were farmers and fishermen that decided that it's just much more profitable, rather than going fishing in the bad ocean, that they would just sail over to other countries and just steal their stuff. That's exactly what they did. There were three types of Vikings back then. There were the Danes. This would be the people that came from Denmark. They were very focused on Britain and France. And they were actually the most organized of the Vikings, because the other types of Vikings, most often they had small groups, maybe just a fishing village with 20 or 40 men. The Danes, they actually put together a large Viking army called the Great Heathen Army of maybe like 1,000 men, and they launched a full-out invasion on Britain. It's actually funny how little known this fact is, but they actually conquered most of Britain. England became part of Denmark in the year 1000. They continued into France. They actually sacked Paris a few times, and they were causing so many problems for the French that it ended up with French offering one of the Vikings land in return that he would just protect them from the other Vikings. This guy was called Rollo. Actually, a lot of people watch the Vikings TV series and they can see a lot of this on popular media. But Normandy, which is in France, was originally just a Nordic settlement from the Danes. And then we had the Swedish people, the Swedes. They were not called the Vikings like the Norwegians and the Danes. They were normally called the Rus. And the reason for that is because they were more interested in what's in the east, which is Finland and modern-day Russia and the Slavic countries. But the Finnish word for the Swedish people is Rus. The names just stuck, and they were just called the Rus. The Swedish were also less violent. They were more focused on the trading with other trade cities rather than just raiding all over the place. Yeah, they were also a little bit more friendly than, for example, the next Vikings that I'm going to show you, which is the Norwegians. I know the picture shows the Norwegians as the berserkers. The Danes and the Swedes, they also had berserkers, which were these crazy animalistic warriors that very frequently actually took mushrooms to help them before battle, but they would just go crazy in an animalistic trance. The Norwegians, they were more interested in what's on the west, to the northwest. And they were also kind of the most adventurous of the Vikings. They were just sailing around, just exploring new parts of the world and settling new places. The Norwegians, they started going to the west, and the first place they reached was Ireland. It's actually the Norwegian Vikings that settled in Dublin. They are the founders of Dublin, but they continued north until they found Iceland. And it is the Norwegians that actually settled Iceland in the year 870. I'm not going to go too deep into what they were doing, but one very important mention is that there was a Norwegian man who moved to Iceland, and his son is actually the European discoverer of America. It's Leif Erikson, one of the most famous Icelandic people. So it's the Norwegians that settled Iceland in the year 870. I'm going to go a little bit into the Norse mythology, or this is actually used to be our religion 1,000 years ago. A lot of people know this already because of the Marvel comics. We believed and truly believed in gods like Odin and Thor and Loki and Freya, the goddess of fertility. We believe that they were constantly fighting the giants, the frost giants and the fire giants. It was just an eternal war going on. We had a lot of stories of monsters, and one of my favorite stories is of Fenrir, the wolf god in Norse mythology. This is also the wolf that my dog was named after. There's a story about Fenrir. He was part wolf, part god, and part giant, and he was growing so fast and so big, the gods actually started being afraid of him, and they wanted to bind him down. And to do that, they told him that they were just testing his strength. They're just gonna try putting some ropes around him and see if he can break away. The first thing they put was this really strong rope around his neck, and he just broke that with no problems. Next, they put a chain around his neck, and he just broke that with no problems. So the gods started to become even more afraid, and they went to the dwarves, which are master blacksmiths in the Norse mythology. They can create magical items, and they asked them to create the strongest chain ever made, which cannot be broken. So the dwarves, they said, we need you to go down to earth and collect a few magical items so that we can make the chain. The magical items that they asked them to collect, they're actually kind of funny. It is the beards of women, and that's why women don't have beards now, because they actually removed that from women. And the roots of the mountains, the saliva of birds, and the sounds that cats make when they step. Just a bunch of very strange things. But they actually created the chain called Gleipnir, and when the dwarves were going to take it to Fenrir, he was a little bit skeptical. He was like, this looks like something different than the other chains that you've been putting around my neck, so I don't feel very comfortable. If you guys want to try this, then someone has to put their hand in my mouth, and if you don't release me, I'm going to bite down. And none of the gods were brave enough, except for Tyr, which is the god of bravery and justice. And he put his hand in his mouth, thinking that maybe he's not going to bite on his hand, because he is also the god that fed Fenrir, gave him food every day. They put the chain around his neck, and it magically contracts, pulls him towards a rock. Fenrir immediately notices what's happening, and he bites down and removes the hand of Tyr. Next, I want to talk about Valhalla. A lot of people already probably know what Valhalla is, but it's the Viking warrior heaven. It's this great hall up in the skies that if you die as a hero in battle, you are chosen by Odin to go to Valhalla. And when you go to Valhalla, it's just a big party. You drink infinite beer, you eat infinite bacon, and then you fight each other till the death in the evening. The next day, everybody just resurrects and keeps drinking and keeps fighting and eating. The thing is, the only way for you to go to Valhalla is by dying a glorious death in battle. If you die from old age, for example, you go to hell. If you die from sickness, you go to hell. Even if you just die after the battle from your wounds, you actually go to hell. So you need to give it your all, give it your best, so that you're chosen by Odin. So the end of the world in Norse mythology is called Ragnarök. This is when all hell breaks loose. On the picture, you can see Fenrir, the wolf. He finally escapes from his chains. Jörmungandr, which is the big serpent Vikings believe is lying in the ocean. The frost giants and the army of the undead finally breaks loose from hell. The fire giants, they tear the sky open and they attack from the sky. And this all ends in the end of the world as we know it. Now we're going to talk about the really juicy stuff, the Icelandic folklore. We are very superstitious people. I guess living on an island for 1,000 years in isolation, it creates some very superstitious people. The most popular folklore about Iceland is the trolls. The trolls in Iceland, they are big, ugly, and stupid creatures. They live in the mountains, in caves. They cannot come out in the daylight because they turn to stone when the sun touches them. But when they come out, sometimes they like to eat humans. And you might also kind of be wondering about this picture that I'm showing. It's from The Lord of the Rings. A fun fact is that The Lord of the Rings is entirely inspired by Iceland because Tolkien, he had an Icelandic babysitter who was telling him stories every day about the Icelandic trolls and the Icelandic elves and such. When the trolls come out and they don't make it back into their cave before dark, this is what happens to them. They turn into stones. And in Iceland, we believe a lot of these rock formations, they're actually trolls that have turned to stone. A particular photo is from the most famous black sand beach in Iceland called the Reynisfjall. The most famous troll story in Iceland is about the Christmas trolls. And the Christmas trolls is a family of trolls that live up in the mountains, but there's 13 brothers called the Yule lads. They are these funny, weird pranksters that come to town in December before Christmas, but only just one at a time. As you can see here, they arrive each day. There's a new one that arrives. What they do is they just prank and steal from us. I know it doesn't sound very friendly already, but they are also like to give gifts to the kids, to the children that put socks up in the window. Every single one of these trolls, they leave a small gift for the children. If the children don't behave, they leave a rotten potato. The joke's on them because I got a lot of potatoes when I was young, but I love potatoes. My favorite Christmas trolls would be the Skyr Gobbler. This guy on the left, he literally just comes to town, breaks into our home, goes into the refrigerator, and steals all of our skyr. The guy on the right, he arrives on Christmas Eve and he just steals all of the candles from the house. So he's quite a nuisance because you do want to have candles for Christmas. Grilla, this is the mother of the Christmas trolls. The Christmas trolls, they're not so evil. They just pranksters. But their mother, she is a big evil troll that eats children. But she only eats the children that don't behave. So on this picture, you can see Grilla running after the kids because if she can grab them, she's going to put them in her sack, put the sack over her back and just take them to her cave where she cooks them in a stew. They also have a cat. This is a large, beastly cat, evil as well because he also eats children, but he only eats the children that don't get new clothes for Christmas. So it's very easy for the parents. They just need to buy new clothes for the kids every year and then the cat will not come and eat them. We also have elves in Iceland. We actually have like 50 different types of elves, but the most popular type of elves is the hidden people. These people, they are tall, elegant, beautiful, and intelligent creatures, but they are always invisible to us unless they choose not to be. So there's only a few chosen people in Iceland that see elves. They live inside of rocks like these. They live in the nature inside of rocks like these. This particular rock is actually the most famous elf rock in Iceland because when they were making the road on this picture, as you can see, the road has been just diverted here to the left because they could not remove the stone because it's believed that the elves were just stopping them. The bulldozers that they were using were actually just breaking down mysteriously. And the people who were working there, they were just getting sick. So eventually they just scrapped the project and just diverted the road. So there's multiple stories about this. Actually, one of my favorite stories about elves in Iceland is about a construction project of a highway. And this also proves that the Icelandic government actually believes in elves. A lot of people ask the Icelandic people if we believe in elves. I can just confirm with you now that the Icelandic government kind of believes in elves. They were building this highway. They had the plans to go through these two rocks that everybody knew were elf rocks. And so everybody was warning the government that it's not a good idea. You don't want to mess with the elves. They're magical and they will not allow you to go through the rocks. The government just said, guys, come on, like we're not gonna change a whole highway just because you think there may be elves in the rocks. So they started constructing the highway and they had no problems whatsoever until they reached the rocks when the same happened. The machines that they were using just started breaking down and the people working with the machines, they were getting sick and had to take days off. And the hand tools that they were using, like the shovels and everything, they were just getting mysteriously stolen. And it started to just cost so much for the government that they actually hired an elf translator. This is an actual person, does this for a living, still alive. She went there and for 2 days, she was negotiating with the elves on pay from the government. Finally, they came to terms that they could move the rocks, but only just as little from the highway as possible. And they had to place them in like the same way that the rocks were before, because the elves really liked their living room view, like of the mountain. The government actually adhered to all of what they wanted. And they spent even more money just doing it like the elves wanted to do it. A lot of people would call it coincidence because nothing happened after that. The construction just went without any more problems. But I find it quite funny that I'm paying taxes in a country and the government is spending it on elf translators. I don't think a lot of countries in the world are doing that. As I was telling you with the trolls, the same goes with the elves. Tolkien was drawing a lot of inspiration from Icelandic folklore and the Norse mythology, the religion as well. It's time for us to go back to Iceland and talk about the ancient trails, which is my favorite trail in Iceland, and it's the trip that I specialize in. So they're called the ancient trails because this is the same way that the Vikings used to go when they were going from the north to the south or vice versa. This was the shortest way in the summer. And it created a lot of very strange stories about trolls and elves and outlaws, because back in the day, we didn't have any prison. We would just send people away in the nature just to fend for their own. And the landscapes in the Central Highlands are just absolutely beautiful. It's a 6-day tour where we go from hut to hut. We get our luggage transported. This is a photo of kind of how the trail looks like. If you look at the map of Iceland, it's in the dead center. We will be going into Kerlingafjöll, which is, in my opinion, the most spectacular place in Iceland. We hike a portion of the north to south, the best part, which goes between these two glaciers here called the Langjökull and Hofsjökull, and it's just phenomenal. This is a little illustration that I'm actually still developing. It's not ready, but it shows you a little bit how the trails works. We start in Reykjavik, we go through the Golden Circle on the way up into the mountains, and then we hike from hut to hut here, and then we drive back. So it all starts from Reykjavik city. This is where you would fly in, and this is where you're going to get picked up. The first stop is going to be Þingvellir National Park, which is incredibly important for two reasons. It's for geological purposes. This is the place in Iceland where the North American tectonic plate and the Eurasian tectonic plates are separating. It creates the Mid-Atlantic Rift. And cliffs here on the right and the left, they are being created because the land is just getting pulled into two pieces, creating these canyon in between that you can walk between continents here. And yeah, of course, for historical purposes as well, because 1,000 years ago when Iceland was settled, for the first 50 years, it was absolute chaos because there were no rules, there were no governments, everyone was just doing their own thing until in the year 930, all of the Viking chieftains from the north and the south and the east and the west came together to form what is now the oldest parliament in the world. And this is the place where they decided new laws. They were deciding what to do with the criminals, and it's still working in the exact same form today, the Parliament of Iceland. After that, we go for lunch in one of the most unique places to eat lunch in Iceland, Efstidalur Farm. We are actually going in their barn that they have changed into a restaurant, and through the window, you can actually see the cows, and you can just see it's straight from farm to table. We're also going to be having an introduction to skyr, the yogurt that we eat. They're going to tell us a little bit about how the farm works and what food they're producing. After that, we head over to Geysir geothermal area. This is the most famous geothermal area in Iceland, and the reason for that is because this is the place where you're going to find geysers. This particular geyser is shooting boiling hot water about 20, 30 meters up in the air. It's like 100 feet every 5 minutes. It's very, very reliable. And after that, we head up in the mountains. As you can probably notice, this is the same photo I showed you before, but this is on the way up into Kerlingafjöll, the Troll Mountains, where we finally get to our first hut where we stay the first night. We're going to cook some really good dinner here. The whole trip is supported by a vehicle, so we have some really good food. We don't have to carry dry food. We don't even have to carry a lot of stuff, just light day packs. After our dinner, we're going for an evening hike into a valley, into the Troll Mountains, just a little bit of a warm-up for what's to come. Deep in this valley, there is a hot spring. This is where we're going to spend our first evening, getting to know the group, tell some stories, and we're just going to make friends. And this hot spring is completely natural, and it's just the perfect temperature to stay for a longer time. These two guys actually happen to be my best friends. So next morning, we wake up and we hike into the mountains. I'm going to be showing you some pictures of the first hike, which is probably gonna blow your mind when you're there. It truly actually looks like on the pictures. We're gonna be hiking, we're gonna be seeing blue glacial rivers, we're gonna see some mysterious mist, perennial snowfields in the mountains, and glaciers as well as just the magnificent mountain range surrounding us. This photo was taken by me this summer, probably something around August. One of the best things about our trip, we have a smaller group capacity. We only take 10 participants, so we're always traveling in a very small group, which means you get a lot of attention from the guide. At the end, we're all just friends. I still talk to my clients from last summer just on a WhatsApp group. And this is how it looks when you're overlooking the valley. The only problem about this place is that it's basically a mountain range in the middle of Iceland, in the highlands, is that sometimes the weather gets absolutely crazy. The good thing about that is that you can get some really dramatic landscapes and views from the weather, and it just feels like you're on a different planet because the weather here just gets interesting and it changes all the time. We can start the hike in snow and we can end it in just glorious sunshine. After the first hike, we actually drive to the next hut. We stay in this really cozy hut with a geothermal pool just right next to us. After the pool, we head over to a very nearby turf house. This is one of the oldest still standing turf houses in Iceland. This is not a restaurant or a museum or anything like that. It's just a very old turf house that has been protected by the government. And we're going in there, we're going to bring food. This is just from a scouting trip that me and my friends were doing. But we're going to have a glorious dinner there. And when it gets dark, we're going to put up some candles. It's just going to be so authentic. This one time, I had a group with 2 musicians. And we brought a guitar into the turf house and we had a little concert in there. It's just, there's nothing more magical than that, in my opinion. So on the next day, we're going to the Valley of Thieves, but we have to go through this lava field, one of the biggest lava fields in Iceland. And we're going to go past a lot of these rock formations. You can actually walk into the rock formations, and we're actually going to have one of our lunches tucked away from the wind in one of these rock formations. You're going to see a lot of sheep on this day. They're just roaming free because in June, in the summer, the farmers release the sheep out into the wild to graze the highlands. They're still domesticated and they come back for them in September to collect the sheep. But for the whole summer, the sheep are just walking around, just doing their own thing. After crossing the lava fields, we start seeing our hut in the middle of just a valley surrounded by mountains in the middle of nowhere. This is my favorite hut in Iceland. It just gets so cozy. It's very small. Kind of a squeeze, but it just means that the group has to interact together, and it creates some very, very funny moments when we're eating dinner there. We're playing card games and just having a good evening. This is actually a picture from the inside. It's so small that if anyone wants to move, everyone else has to stand up and move for them. And as you can see on this picture, actually Fenris is with me on this trip, and normally he likes to sleep outside. Unless the weather is crazy or there's like a big rainfall, we sometimes sneak him in, but generally he likes to sleep outside. He's a Siberian Husky. This is what he's made for. In the evening or in the afternoon, it depends a little bit on the groups or the conditions, we hike up this mountain, because on the other side of this mountain, we got this view. This is the same view that I was telling you earlier. In my opinion, this is one of the most Icelandic views you can get. And if you look in the other direction, it just feels like you can see everything in Iceland. You can almost see from the north to the south. The next day, again, we're following the ancient Viking route, but this time we're going to have a lot of cairns. Cairns are these rocks that have been stacked together to mark the way. They're like modern day GPS points. And we're just going to be following the next one and the next one. These were created 1,000 years ago by the Vikings themselves when they were creating the route from the south to the north. We're going to be hiking along a river as well, past this incredible mountain. This mountain is called Hrútfell, but a lot of times people from my groups, they have dubbed this mountain to be Cupcake Mountain, because it looks like the glacier is just sliding down the mountain like icing on a cupcake. Finally, we're going to cross the river. We are not going to be jumping the river. There's actually like a small bridge. I don't have a photo of the bridge now, but this is one of our guides on a trip without clients. And he just decided to jump because this is what people used to do back in the day. He's just a little bit crazy. Don't do this. This will not end well if you fall into the river. When we reach the hut, it's like a highland oasis. We have a beautiful view. It's a little bit of an upgrade in size from the last hut, so it feels like you're in a palace now. Anyway, the car to reach this hut, this is what the luggage transport vehicle is doing. I just like showing it because this is actually one of the most interesting parts about this day, is seeing the way that the car has to come, because he has to cross this large glacial river. And that's why we use these large cars with snorkels, because the river frequently just goes over the hood of the car, and the car kind of just floats down the river. Don't worry, the luggage still does not get wet. You will be seeing the car parked outside the hut, and it just looks like a Ford commercial. It's a pretty big car. This particular car, this is like our main car that we use to transport luggage. It's sitting at around 44-inch tires. But the next day is going to be a much easier, like it's the longest distance, but it's quite a flat hike through a very vegetated area. It's strangely vegetated if you think about where you are. You are just next to a glacier and you're walking through these like beautiful green fields. We cross this bridge. I always like to point this out. We cross the river again by a bridge, and there are these trolls just hiding under the bridge, just waiting to snatch us. And then we walk through this very vegetated area with crystal clear waters. Just kind of gives off a Hobbit vibe. The last hut we stay in on day 5 is the oldest mountain hut in Iceland. This hut used to be a complete turf house. It's been renovated recently, but this is one of the most unique accommodations that you can stay in Iceland. And to make it even better, we're going to be having a feast here. This is going to be our special goodbye dinner. We're going to be having a barbecue feast. We're grilling like a lamb, but don't worry, we also have some vegan alternatives. We're going to have a really good time here, because the next day we're heading back to civilization. And the first part of the drive is just kind of looks like you're on the moon. There's absolutely nothing there. It's just black desert. And when we finally get down from the mountains, we're going to stop by at the waterfall, Gullfoss, to finally complete our golden circle on the way back. So this waterfall is one of the biggest, but also one of the most beautiful waterfalls in Iceland, and it falls down in a few steps. After that, we will be heading to a very local restaurant called Farmer's Bistro, where we're going to have an introduction into the only mushroom farm in Iceland. And after that, we're going to eat the soup that they make just straight from the farm. This is, of course, where everyone is going to be sharing stories and talking about the trail. Because after that, we head down to Reykjavik. This photo is from one of the famous streets in Iceland called the Rainbow Street, because Iceland just happens to be one of the most inclusive country in the world. We're very friendly. We just like everyone. That concludes it for the trail. We definitely would love to see you with us. It's going to be a great summer. I just know. Thank you guys so much.